Hey everyone. So this week we're going to go back to some basics and review, just because I know people have pens and pencils, and so I'm going to show you how to do our shading with a pen because we didn't really do that first semester, so we focused more on like pencil and blending and controlling our pencil. So I'm going to show you some other techniques. But just to review, when we're looking at an object, every object is going to have these things. We're going to have a light source, so where the light is coming from. The light where it hits the object directly is going to be the widest area, which is our highlight. And then as that object is rounding away, that means less light is hitting this area. So this is called our midtones or our middle gray values. And then where it gets super dark, our darkest part of our shadow on the object, this is actually called a core shadow. This is our core shadow. And then if you notice, our shadow doesn't go all the way to the edge of our object here because the light bounces off the table onto the bottom. So we have what's called reflective light here. And it says reflection here, but it's reflective light here. And then the shadow that our object creates is called a cast shadow. Okay, so these are our basics. And I just kind of want to show you what that looks like here. So here our light source is in a different space. So here our light source is to the side, and that's because the shadow's going off to the side. Here our light source is above because our highlight is on the top. So our highlight's on the top here. Here's our middle, our mid value area. And then you see how it gets lighter down here. This is part of our reflective light, which makes all of this our core shadow. And then this becomes our cast shadow. So I'll have this resource up on Google Classroom along with this handout, which might look familiar to those of you who had me first semester. And this will just be for you so you can see how light hits every object. Okay. And then the view of our cube, 2 sides versus 3 sides. Okay. And again, this, I'm not going to go over each one just because we've done this at the beginning of the semester, beginning of the school year. I just kind of want to review a little bit. Okay. I'll also post up in our resources videos from first semester on light and shadow and how to create a value scale and how to shade the forms for those who want a refresher or were not with us first semester. This way you can get caught up with us. So let's start with our 4 forms. We're going to do a blending technique, and I'm going to do this really rough, and we've done these before, but we're going to draw a circle. Now, some of you are more insecure about drawing your circle. I think a quarter is too small to trace, so if you can find something that's bigger than a quarter, about this size, right? So this is the top of one of my little paint jars here. If you want something that's a little bit, that's round for you to trace, you can do so. Just make sure it's bigger than the quarter, or you can just go ahead and freehand this. I don't care if your circle is not perfect. Okay, so we're gonna have our circle. We're also going to have our cube. So we're going to draw it with the top view up. So I'm going to draw a straight line down. Remember, if we're seeing the top of our cube, then the top line and the bottom line angle up. Bring that straight down. These two lines need to be parallel to each other. This line can either go straight out or it can go up as well, so I'm going to make these two lines go up. If we don't see the top, then the top line's angled down. But we want to see the top for this one. Okay, bring that line down. And then I need to parallel this line. So if this line's going out this direction, this line needs to go the same direction. Okay. So remember our test, I use a paintbrush here, is to take two items to kind of lay them on top of my lines, and if they're going the same direction, that's good, because we don't want one to go up and one to go down. So if you can have two things to kind of help you see if they're parallel. And then this line's going down or angled this way, so I want to angle this way, and I'm going to use my my paintbrush and my pencil to make sure they're both parallel, right? They're both going in the same direction. And then we're going to have a cone, and remember the cone has an ellipse at the bottom, so I'm going to draw a sideways U, a lane, like a U laying down. I'm going to draw the same thing on the other side, so I'm going to connect these two, so another U shape. And then we're just going to make a pointed cone. I'm going to bring this line up, angled from the outside edge, bring that up. I can round my corner here. And then when I'm done, I'm going to erase that line so I have my cone. And this way I have a nice round bottom, because cones have a circle on the bottom, so we got to make sure it looks round. And then the last one I'm going to do is our cylinder. And I'm going to start with the same thing as our cone, because it also has a round bottom and a round top. So I'm going to draw my U shape, laying down. Do another U shape to connect it. And then I'm going to bring my lines straight up, and you can make this as tall as you want. And then I'm going to make this a little bit skinnier, so I'm going to make a skinnier U. Because as we get higher up, our ellipse starts to flatten out a little bit, so it gets a little bit skinnier. I'm going to make another skinny U on this side. Make sure the corner, these outside corners, stay nice and round. Don't make them a point. And then when I'm done, I'm going to erase this. Okay. So if we have our light source, let's say our light source is over here. Okay, let me zoom in a little bit here. We'll just focus on the circle first. If our light source is here, then this is going to be our highlight, and our shadow, so if we draw from like the center of our light source here, our shadow is going to be here, and our shadow will extend out here. But I'm not going to make it that long because it cuts into our cube here. So our shadow essentially goes like this, like an ellipse, and it rounds out. And this shadow would actually connect all the way over here because that's where it's at. But we're going to shorten it up just so that we make room for our cube. So I like to use the side of my pencil always laying down flat. When I'm shading, I don't usually like drawing with my point because that's how we get our lines. And if you're going to just do lines, then that's where our other methods are going to come into play. But if you want to do blending, you always want to shade with the side of your pencil. I like to hold my pencil from the back mid area. Remember, the further back you hold it, the lighter your values are. The closer you get to the bottom, the darker your values are. So I like to hold it somewhere like between the middle and the back part of it. And when you're blending, you want to shade with the roundness of the ball. So the ball's round, so our shading should be round. And I start in the middle because it's easier to start in the middle and then to get lighter as you get towards the highlight. And then I can start to get darker as I move my way here. Now I don't want to shade all the way to the edge. I want to leave some of my reflective light. I can get all the way to the edge up here. And I just want to make sure I start to get darker, because now I'm going to bring my hand in a little bit closer. And you want to be careful you don't have what I call kind of like the crescent moon shape. Notice that all my edges are blending with one another. I'm not pressing super hard. Where it's solid black. And then I go back and I lightly fade it out. I'm going to fade this out down here to give my reflective light. Now our reflective light should never be lighter than our mid-gray value. It should be a little bit darker. So I'm going to just lightly bring that in. Add some more values. And then down here, our cast shadow is always tends to be darker close to the object. And then depending on how close the light is, if the light's really close, then you'll have a nice crisp shadow. If the light is far away, then the shadow will fade and get lighter as it moves away. Okay, so what I'm going to do, we're going to go down to hatching. So we're going to stick with our circle here. Some tape to hold this. So I'm going to draw another circle. And feel free to pause this video wherever you need to catch up. Okay, so hatching means that we're drawing in lines. Okay, the closer our lines are together, the darker. Okay, so the more lines I put, the darker they get. But as I move over, the further away I make the lines, the lighter the value is. So that's how we'll get our value. So following the same rules as our sphere above, we've got our light source. I'll put in my shadow. Get this more on camera here. So here, what I might do, you can do this one of two ways. You can just draw lines straight across, but that kind of flattens out your shape and we want to keep it round. So to keep it round, you might want to do curved lines. So I'm going to start with just some light curved lines, and then it'll probably straighten out and then start to curve the other direction. And if you notice, I'm leaving this space alone because that's going to be our highlight, and I'm spacing these apart. And the reason I'm doing that is because now I can go back and I can draw some shorter lines to create the change in value. So I'm going to bring in between these areas, I'm going to draw some shorter lines. And I can do this with pen, I can do this with pencil. So this is kind of the alternative for those students who only have like a pen to work with. And then I'm going to start bringing those lines a little bit closer. Now I'm going to stop going all the way to the edge of my sphere because I want to create that reflective light. So I want to add some more lines. I'm going to make the lines a little bit shorter. And the more lines I add, the more value it's going to have. Now my reflective light is really bright, so I might just draw a few more lines going all the way through. And then for my shadow, I would probably just do lines straight across. A lot of lines close here, and then start to do fewer lines as I move my way out. Okay. So that's cross-hatching, and this is a great technique to use with pen, even though I'm using pencil for this. Or you can use pencil. It's not going to change it. On the cube, I'll go ahead and use pen so I can show you the difference. So our next one's going to be cross-hatching. So cross-hatching is similar to hatching, just that you're crossing it. So you might have lines really close together and then they start to space out. And then what's happening is you have lines crossing the other direction, and they might be really close together and then start to space out. Okay, so same thing. Closer the lines get together, they get darker. Further apart the lines are, the lighter the value. So here I might do the same thing. I'm going to start with my lines that are going to curve. I'm going to start to straighten it out and start to curve it the other direction. Okay. And I can do the same for the other side here. So I can start to draw my lines this way and go further apart, and then as I'm getting closer to the edge here or to my core shadow, I can bring them a little bit closer together. And I might go back and add some of my shorter lines like I did before. And then add my shorter lines. And bring just a few more lines here into my reflective light. And I can get darker if I want to. And how hard I press with my pencil is also going to be a contributing factor for this. For the bottom, it's going to be the same thing. I might go more at a slant. And then cross the other direction. And then I have my sphere cross-hatched. This one, I'm actually going to use a marker for this one. Stippling just means you're using dots. And same thing, the closer together your dots are, the darker the value. The more you spread out the dots, the lighter the value. This can look really cool, but if your artwork's pretty big, it takes a really long time. It requires a lot of patience. I'm not sure if any of you have that right now. It might be really soothing right now to do, but it's something that takes a really long time. It's not something you can really rush, especially if you're using a pencil or like a regular pen. I kind of recommend if you're going to do stippling, you use markers. So I'm going to use these 3 markers. I'm going to show you how I'm going to create the values with 3 markers. You could just do 1, but if you're going to use, if you want to incorporate color, then I'd have a light and a medium and a dark color. And so what I'm going to do is put in some orange dots evenly spaced around, and because it's the marker, it goes a little bit faster than if it was a pen. So I have orange, and I just kind of evenly space them around. Then I'm going to go in with my pink. I'm going to start to bring the dots a little bit closer together. And notice I'm not going all the way to the edge here. I'm going to start to create that fade. I'm going to bring it into my reflective light. And be careful. I run into the habit where some of my dots, because I start going fast, they all kind of land really close to each other. So they kind of create these like clumps, so be careful about that. And if you see like really big gaps, you can go in and just strategically place one in. So now I have the orange kind of fading into the pink. And now I'm going to use my red, and I'm going to put my red in my core shadow area. And this is how old comic books or comics and newspapers are printed. They're printed with dots, different color dots that just blend together with our eye kind of blends them together so that we see certain colors. And then I've blended in my red. And then for the bottom, I want my dots to be super close together. And then start to fade them out. And I can do the same with like the multiple colors down at the bottom. I'm just going to keep it simple. And so that is stippling. The last thing I want to show you is called line quality. And those of you who are anime fans, you actually see this quite a bit in the character designs. So line quality. So line quality means that, and I'm going to continue with my marker because it's a little bit easier. Line quality means that the line goes from like thin and then it starts to get thick, and then it'll transition to thin and transition to thick. And so it takes some practice doing this. There are pens, like brush pens, that some of you might have that have a flexible nib on the end so that you can apply pressure to it and get these like thick and thin areas. And what's happening is where the line gets thicker, that counts as a shadow, and where it gets thinner, then that's where light is hitting. So if we were to do our sphere, this is a really nice, simple way to draw. We're just going to do the ball by itself. For this one, I'm not going to do a cast shadow. The cast shadow, well, I'll do a cast shadow. Let's do a cast shadow. For this, the cast shadow would just be solid. So our light source has been coming from this direction over here. And so I would draw a thin line here, and then where it's starting to get darker, I would start to thicken up my line. And I could layer this a little bit to thicken this up, and then thicken this up a little bit more. So then it's going from light to dark because the line's heavier on this side. For our cast shadow, what I would do and kind of make it a little bit solid, and then transition its way into it, or I would just make it solid. And it's probably just easier to make it completely solid. But you can also, for your cast shadow, you could have kept this nice and thick and then thinned out. And then kept that thick and then thinned out. So our cast shadow could have like done this. It could have been really thick and then went to thin, and then really thick and then went to thin to create that same like look that it's fading. Okay, so this is if you want something that's just all lines. It kind of looks what's called like a wood block print, which is kind of like a stamp, right? So let's try this with our other object. So let's go back and let's do our cube real quick. Okay, so before we get started on the cube, let's just draw our cube a few more times. Just like the way we did before. And don't worry about it not being perfect. I'm going to draw it again here. I hope all of you are doing well, doing the best that you can. Okay, I'm going to draw one more for our line quality here. Okay, so we have all of our cubes. Okay, let's go back to this one. So this is our blending one. Actually, what I didn't show you on the circle before we move on to that is if you don't have your blending stump and you're having a hard time with your shading, you can take your Q-tip and you can start in the light area and in a circular motion, make sure it's in a nice little circle, and you can blend this. Now remember, this isn't magic. This only blends as far as how much graphite you have down, right? It's not going to keep smudging all over the place, but it does smooth things out a bit. I would start in my lighter areas and then move into my dark areas so that the lighter areas don't get too dark when you are blending. Okay, so if you don't have your blending stick, a Q-tip is a great tool for that. Also, because you're using a Q-tip, if there's a little bit of pencil on there, you can use it to help shade some light areas. So that's a difference between the blending sticks. Sometimes the blending sticks don't do that because they get super, super shiny. So that's something you can definitely use. So here, let me erase that. So here, we're going to have our light source in the same spot. Light source here. That means this is going to get all the light. This is going to be a middle gray, and this will be our darkest. So we'll have shadow extending this way out. Okay. And then the shadow end will be parallel to the top edge there. So I'll go ahead and start with the middle value. So this could all be one value, or you can go from light to dark. It's usually going from light to dark, but we can go ahead just to keep this simple, just make this a nice middle value. Make sure you're shading all the way to the edge of the pencil line here, because we don't really want outlines. So my outline's a little too dark. So I'm going to go in and I'm just going to lightly make that a little bit skinnier and lighten it up. I want to make this nice and even. So this, if you can't get this nice and even, that's where that technique of using your Q-tip can help make it even a little bit. Okay. Now this side should be darker. So right now I have this outline, and that's okay because I'm going to make this darker. And I do want to leave room for a little bit of reflective light. So I'm not going to go all the way down to the bottom. So I'm kind of shading against the edge here. And usually the reflective light kind of happens at a diagonal here. Usually, not always the case. I'm making this a nice 60% value. I'm not getting super, super dark. And then I'm going to start fading it and get a little bit lighter. And remember, my reflective light should not be lighter than this. So let me go in and definitely get to about maybe a 40 or 50% value here. Okay, and for our cast shadow, it's going to look like an outline here at the bottom because it's really close to it's flat against the table. Okay, and then the top, because it's flat, it's not going to be pure white across the top. It's usually lighter on the opposite side of wherever like the light is. So whatever's closest is usually a little, just tiny bit of gray. So like a 10-20% amount of gray that fades and then gets to pure white. So I usually just gently touch a little bit of pencil to that side and then leave the other side white. So it's usually the opposite end. Or I think of like whatever the darkest side is has the lighter side. You just want to make sure that these two are different in value. Okay, before we do the next one, I did want to show you something. I'm going to do it right above here. So if you have a ballpoint pen like this, you just need to scribble a little bit to get the ink flowing sometimes, but I do love a ballpoint pen because you can shade like a pencil with it. So you can, if you get a good rhythm going, right, it takes some practice, but if you barely touch the paper, you can get a light value. And then as I start to press harder, I can get a darker value. So essentially I could have shaded this with the pen. Maybe I'll do that with the cone so you can see what it does. You just can't really smudge that well, right? I mean, you can kind of smudge the pen. So, but you'll still have lines and streaks. Okay, so let's look at our hatching here. So I'm going to go ahead and outline this. And I want to have my lines going all in one direction. So I'm just going to, this is going to be my darker side. Remember, the lines closer together create a darker value. And if I could just leave it like this, and then this side have a medium value. So I might want to, if I'm going to go diagonal, I probably want to do the same thing here. And for those of you who like super straight lines, you could use a ruler. It does make it go a little bit slower, takes a little bit more time. But you can just freehand it as well. So that would be my middle value. I might go in and just draw a few more lines here. And then on this side, just to keep in line with the values here, I might just do a few lines going this direction and spaced apart to kind of show that little bit of value there. Then for the cast shadow, make sure they're super close together. Okay. So the cross hatching will be the same thing, except I draw my lines across the other way. So I'm gonna skip that one. And then stippling, same thing. Our lines close, our dots close together. Dots a little bit further apart. And just a few dots here. So I'm kind of outlining my edges with the dots to create those 3 edges. Okay, and then for line quality, make this really thick, really thin. Probably make the top one thin, this side thin, and then this bottom one a little bit on the thicker side so that it's looking like there's light more on this side of the box. And then our cast shadow. Okay. And then our cone. So if our light source is here, I can either shade across this way, following the roundness of the cone, which I might do both. So I'm going to use the pen so I can show you both. And this is going to look like, actually, I'll just keep doing it with the pencil. No, I'm going to go ahead and do this with the pencil. Only because it's going to look too much like the cross hatching. And I'll show you what why. So I'm going to shade across here. I'm going to start in the middle. And I'm just kind of getting across to kind of get this width here. And then I'm going to just lightly bring this down. Get a little bit darker in the middle and start to get darker towards the side over here. Making sure you get all the way down to the bottom here. And then I'm going to get a little bit lighter for my reflective light. The bottom of this is going to be a really dark outline because it's lying flat on the table. And then from about halfway, so wherever the shadow is, that's usually where your cone, and then wherever the top of our ellipse was, so the top of our ellipse was on the inside here, it's going to angle in like this. So our shadow doesn't really go from the very bottom, it's going to go from the other side here. And get our shadow out. I'm getting a little messy here because I'm trying to speed up so you guys can do this on your own. Okay, so I'm going to draw the cone again. So I'm going to start with the ellipse at the bottom. So I'm going to draw my U shape sideways, draw my U shape again. Okay, so this is the bottom. Where this is at, that's going to become the shadow for the side. So I'll show you that in a little bit. So here I'm going to bring this side up, bring this side up, and try to make sure that you're meeting somewhere in the middle here. You don't want your cone to be off sides. So before you erase this, you might want to put a little line over here so that you know that your cast shadow is going to go from this area to this area, and it angles in because it's a triangle. And so once I have that, I can go in and erase that. Okay. So let's do that again. So my sideways U shape, sideways U shape to create my ellipse. this is the top of where my shadow is going to be at. Okay. So I'm going to start with these here. Okay. So for hatching, we can either do lines going across this way, like following the roundness of it, or you can go the opposite direction. So it's up to you. So on this one, let's just do straight lines. So I can start with a few straight lines going straight down the center here, and then they kind of get a little bit more spaced out. I don't want to put too many over here, so then I'm going to come back and I'm going to draw a few more lines here in the center. And just having lines up and down, and then having my lines here. So you can contour it that way with your hatching. The other way, I'll go ahead and outline this first. Would be to draw lines to show the roundness of this. So I can do these curved lines, and as I start to move towards the middle of it, I want to kind of start to go a little bit straight and then maybe start to curve the other direction, right? I can make some of these a little bit longer actually. And then from here, go back and start to add shorter lines in between. And then just bring back a few on the side here for the reflective light, right? So you can either have, for hatching, this direction or this direction. And then the bottom would still be the same, really close. One direction. For the cross hatching though, you would just do both. So I would add these lines on top of it. And then same with this cross. These lines. So if I were shading, trying to shade the pen or shade the cone with the pen, so if here's my cone, I can just do light pressure scribbling. I'm going to start to press a little bit harder. So this is with the pen, so I'm just going to kind of scribble a little bit and just lightly. But I can also do the other way, so it kind of starts to look kind of like your cross hatching. Right, so it's a little bit more rushed if you're trying to blend with the pen, but it does have that kind of blended look when you start out. So when I was just going one direction, just real quick so you can see a little bit. When I was going one direction, very light value, and then if I stay in one area, it gets darker and darker. And with that light pressure, and I just kind of move slightly left and right, it's going to create that look like a pencil, right? That blended pencil, but it's pen. It is a little bit messier. It takes some pressure. It takes getting used to, so you might want to just practice that if you like. Hold on, I'm going to adjust here. Okay, so I'm going to skip stippling for this one. Let's go to line quality. Just so you can practice that. So line quality, this side would be really thin. This side would be thick. Probably thin, too thick here. And then our shadow. Okay. And then our last one is going to be our cylinder, which is very similar to the cone. So I kind of feel like I'm gonna do less with this one, just because it's got the round bottom. So instead of going up at an angle, you're just going straight up and down. So same thing. So I can kind of see my ellipse here a little bit still. And so I'm going to, from this point here, that's where like my shadow is going to extend out. And then same thing, a lighter on this side, and this is going to transition to dark. Make sure you get all the way up to that edge. Leave a little room for your reflective light. This too will be kind of an outline because it's laying flat on the table. Shading out. And then my rule of thumb for this, it's hard to see sometimes on photos. I'll just lighten up my line a little bit here. I tend to follow the same rule of thumb. If this side is darker, then the top's gonna be lighter, and if this side is light, then the top is gonna be darker. And it doesn't have to be that dark. It's just slight value here, and just fades. So that might be a little too dark. So I might go in and just dab with my eraser to lighten that up a bit. But that would be our cylinder there. So for our next one, zoom out a bit. So for the hatching, which I'll just do the hatching one, and I think you can figure out the cross hatching and the stippling. And I'll do line quality for sure, because that's very new to you. But the others, you should be able to proceed on your own, because it's the same process. I'll take a photo of all of them completed and have it with it so that you can copy this. I do want you to take a photo of what you did as a practice so I can see your process with the techniques, because this is how we'll shade our comic books. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to outline these things. And same thing, I can either go straight up and down or I can curve. It's up to you. I kind of like the straight up and down. I think it's a little bit easier. So fewer lines here, and then I'm going to start with just a few lines. I kind of just do really light pressure lines here, and then start to press down a little bit more as I move over to the darker areas. And then I just put in a few strategic lines here to fade this out. And what I'm doing here is I'm doing these shorter lines to make sure that I'm going right up against the edge, because a lot of times when I'm drawing my lines, I don't go all the way to the edge. And then here I'm going to draw just a few lines, very light lines going across, so that I'm still following that rule. If this side's light, this side has a little bit of shadow, this side's dark, that's going to be white. Oops. And then there's the cylinder in pen using hatching. So you'll do the same for cross hatching, you'll do the same for stippling, and then we'll do line quality. And let me erase this part. So the top, I can, if I can, make this a little bit thinner and then make this slightly thicker. I can imply a little bit of a shadow on that side and then thinner on that side, so it's our highlight. And then I can make this side thin. Oops. This side I can make nice and thick. And then this side I can go a little bit more pressure and then get nice and thick on this side. So I kind of messed up there, but it's okay, whatever. So thin to thick lines. Okay. So I hope this is a good review. I'll have one more demo video for this week, and then we'll start moving into more comic book stuff next week. Hope you're all doing well.